Okay, so hi everyone. I'm so happy you're here and I'm super excited. We have Leah tonight and she's from the Learning Code Camp. So Leah, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Hi everyone. So my name's Leah. I'm from Canada Learning Code. I'm the Barrie chapter lead. So we run workshops for adults, kids, and teens. Usually when we're in person, we actually did all of them at Georgian College. Since we're remote, they're all online, and we just run free workshops to kind of get everybody excited about code and learn more about it. So I'm super excited for to show you guys. We're going to do introduction to Python and SQL. It's a little ambitious because they're both like little in-depth topics, but I really enjoy both of those languages and I couldn't pick which one to do. So has anyone kind of played around with Python anymore? Are you guys played around with Python before, or are you guys like familiar with it? I'm seeing a couple of hands, which is great. So I'll share my screen in a second. So the IDE I use for Python is Pycharm, and I'll send you guys the link in the chat. I'm also going to send another link, which is called, I don't know if I'm going to say it right. It's like repl.it, and it just lets you use play around with Python on your browser instead of having to download Pycharm. Both of them are great options, and yeah, I will send the links now. I save them, and then while you guys are kind of looking at the links, I will get my screen all set up.
I've never done Python. I kind of like started it, and then I got like really wrapped up in school. And the link that you're sending, is it this like when you say your browser, is it a little bit like CodePen.io or?
Yeah, kind of like CodePen. It lets you just play around with a bunch of different languages. So the one that I sent is for Python 3. And then the other one, sorry, I might be a little slow sometimes sending links. My external monitors decided to stop working. So I'm just down to one computer today, but that is okay. And so this is Pycharm. This is the IDE that I like to use. But there are other ones. Idle is also a good one. I find I like the customization options of Pycharm, and it just works best for me.
Awesome.
And okay, so can everybody see my screen?
Yeah.
Perfect. Fantastic. And is the size okay? Yes, thumbs up if it's good. Thumbs up, thumbs down if I need to increase the size. Okay. So perfect. So one of the things I really like about Python is the fact that it's not as complicated, I find, as other languages. It's very intuitive in a sense. Like for instance, for variables, I don't know if you guys have done Java or other programming languages, but in Java, you have to say the type of variable and then give the variable name and then assign it a value. Whereas in Python, it's a lot easier. You can just give the variable name and then just assign it a value. It's more intuitive in a sense. I like to say it's kind of like speaking. It's not as complicated, at least I find for me personally. So first thing I thought we'd just kind of talk about is the different types of variables. So this line here, x equals 1, all we're doing here is we're assigning the value of 1 to the variable x. And so in this case, 1's an integer, and Python automatically knows it, so we don't have to declare it as an integer. And I didn't say this before, but if you guys have any questions at all, just kind of just say them out loud, or if you want to throw a button on the chat, although I probably saying it out loud will be easier just to kind of catch my attention.
I have a question. I'm sorry. I don't know if you're going to cover that later on. I'm pretty sure you will. It's just that I'm super excited. So when you say x is equal to 1, so and you said earlier you don't have to declare variables, so you don't have to say like var a is equal to 1 or let const. You can just like put it that way, and the computer like automatically understand and knows that it is an integer, a double, or something like that.
Yeah.
Right?
Good. Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks.
Yeah. No, Python is, I think it's a great first programming language, in my opinion. It's the first one that I covered in university. In high school, we actually did Java, and I think Python would have been the better starting language just because it gives you the basics pretty quickly, and then that way you're able to go on to like the more complicated stuff without having to worry about all the technical stuff, as like the syntax and everything. It's just a lot easier in my opinion. So then for strings, you can do strings in two different ways. One is just with the single quotation, and then you can also do double quotations. It's kind of like stylistic how you do it. So next one, I equals 0.1. This is going to be a double. It's just a different type of value. And we also have Boolean variables. So Boolean variables are kind of special. There's true or there's false. And it's kind of for evaluating expressions. So, and we'll get into if statements in a bit, but for an if statement, you can kind of evaluate things, and you can say, if, for instance, if I'm hungry, do this. So you'd want to check. So the condition would be if I'm hungry. So if it's true and I am hungry, I'd have something to eat. If it's false and I'm not hungry, then we could do something else. So you can add integers together. You can add strings together, essentially, other than Booleans, because Booleans are special and we don't add Booleans together. But you can add like variables together. So, for instance, we could do 1 + 1. And this print statement is just going to print it to the console down here. And so, and that's on me. I was playing around with one of our other examples earlier. So we just did print 1 + 1 and it just added it together. So you also don't have to declare something as a variable. So you can just do 1 + 1. We could also do equals 1, and then you could do they're the exact same thing. Okay. So this is an expression, and you'd be evaluating it. So we're evaluating true and false. So and is a special condition, and we'll talk a little bit about it in detail a little bit later. For an and to be true, both the left side and the right side both have to be true. So it has to be true and true. In this case, because we have true and false, the right side is false, so it automatically evaluates to false. We also have.
I have a question. So in what kind of situation would you use true and false? Like for example, if you use like 1 + 1, you normally have it in loop or arrays when you use it. So when it comes to true and false, like when is it that we can like kind of use it?
Well, like this is like a simplified example, but you'd probably be using Boolean variables when you're comparing two things. So for instance, if you had a list, let's say, and you wanted to check to see if your list contained two different things, then you could say, if apple is in my list and pear is also in the list, do this. So you'd want both sides. It's kind of like checking for two different things.
Gotcha. Yeah.
You could also put Booleans into a loop and other stuff. It's just kind of wanted to show you guys Booleans, because sometimes, like when I first started coding, I actually found Booleans a little tricky, just so I thought I'd touch on them a little bit just so you guys get familiar. We can also concatenate strings. So concatenate usually just means add. So you can just run it and it just prints to the screen. And if you want to have a space, you can just add in the space. Yeah, it's like that. So in terms of like comparing numbers and integers, it's pretty similar to just like regular math expressions. There are two big differences. For equals, because we use just a single equal as a variable assignment, the double equals refers to equals. So you're comparing whether or not 1 = 1 or 2 = 2. And then another special thing is does not equal. So we have a exclamation mark, and typically in Python, exclamation mark means not and then equal. So it's just not equal. And then you just have the greater than symbol doesn't change. The greater than or equal to, you just have the greater than symbol and it equals. The less than or equal to is the less than symbol as well as an equals, and less than's the same. And kind of see that there. So this evaluate, so essentially we looked at this 2 not equal to 2, and 2 does equal to 2. So my statement was false, and that's why it printed false to the console. And just let me know if I'm going too fast. If you guys have questions. When I get nervous, I tend to go a little fast, so totally feel free to slow me down. I promise this will get a little bit more interesting once we kind of get to do some of the fun stuff, but it's important to kind of talk about the basics at the start, and that way we can do some cool stuff. We're going to write a simple username generator later on, just so you guys can kind of play around with it.
Leah, I do have a quick question. I mean, one time I was playing with Python and I kept getting tripped up on certain syntax. Is Python very syntax strict at all?
So it does care about the way you write your variables and everything, but in general, it's not a fussy language. So you don't need to have these semicolons. Brackets are a little important, but not too much. You don't have to have curly brackets or anything. It's
the indentation, does it not?
Yes.
Okay.
Tabs.
Yes. Okay.
Only use tabs.
Only use tabs.
Not.
No
spaces are just no.
So they've already made the decision. It's tabs.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. That explains. Okay. Thank you.
Yes. No. Yes. Spaces are just no. I don't know if I have the slide, but there is a joke about spaces and tabs. I think it is in one of the slides that I've got. But yes, no. Spaces are bad in Python. Tabs are your friend. So we kind of talked about this. So when you're naming variables, there are 2 ways you can do it. First off, the name of a variable in Python, just in terms of like the way we've decided to name variables in Python, just that's how everybody does it. Start typically lowercase, and then you have 2 options. So you can use, if you want your variable to be the variable name to have 2 different words in it. So like this is just, I've named it word_var, and I'm just saying word variable equals fun guy. The other option that you can do is you can do something called Camel Case. So I could also have written it like this. And we'll just call this something. So yeah, those are like the 2 main ways you want to do it. And in specifically Python, most programming languages, they are case sensitive. So if everything has to match exactly for 2 variables to be exactly the same. So if I were to write it like this, the Pycharm is not going to think that word_var and one_var with a capital V are the same. It's always case sensitive, which can make it a little tricky sometimes, but okay. So yes, you can also reassign a value to a variable. So for instance, here I assigned the value, I assigned slogan the value, and boardman gets paid. You can also assign, so now I reassigned word_var to slogan. And does anyone have a guess what word underscore var is going to be now that I've reassigned it to slogan. You can kind of just shout it out.
Boardman gets paid.
And why? Yes, because I counted it out, the value. Yes, Boardman gets paid. But you can see there, when I commented out word var, Pycharm did not realize that word underscore var is very similar. It's not, if it's not exactly the same, it won't find it, which is why you really have to be careful about your spelling and your capitalization and everything, because that can be something that can trip you up.
I have a question. So, and I know it's not the same. Python and JavaScript is not the same, but I kind of have like reassigned values in JavaScript, and I don't know if it, like, tell me if it's the same in Python. So since, sorry, Boardman was assigned to slogan, so slogan is not, slogan was reassigned to varword, so varword is not fun guy anymore. It's Boardman gets paid. So if I use varword again, would I have the same as slogan because it was reassigned, or will I have fun guy again?
No, once you've assigned slogan to word var, it stays word var. If we remove the assignment, or if we reassigned word var to fun guy, that would change it. But no, once it's been assigned, that's the way it stays. And so these are all local variables. That's important to know. So they're all these assignments are true in this example1.py file. If we were to go to a different one of the files in the setup that I've done, word var isn't assigned to anything, so you can't call it. It's just going to produce an error. So there also are global variables. We're not really going to get into those today just because of timing and stuff and the scope of variables. But yeah, these are all just going to be local.
Okay. So if I'm going to use word again, I'm sorry, just to make sure. So I understood. So if I'm going to use word var again, it's going to be Boardman gets paid.
If it's below the assignment.
If like it's below the. Okay, yeah. Gotcha.
So if we go back, so up here we assigned it to word var to fungi, right? When we call it here with the print statement, it's going to print out fungi because we're above the second assignment. Then when we reach word var equals slogan, word var stops being fungi and becomes Boardman gets paid.
Yeah, gotcha. Thanks.
Okay. No problem. Does anybody else have any questions before I move on to the next thing we're going to cover? Okay. So the next thing we're going to talk about is lists. So lists essentially in Python are just used to store like terms together. And you can have different types of lists. Typically best practice, although it won't produce an error, is if you don't do this way, it's just to keep like terms together. So you want to put your strings together, your integers, your Booleans, and your doubles or floats all in their own separate lists. It just makes your life easier. You can mix it up and it won't produce an error. I just find it's a lot easier to do so. And so you can also print out lists too. So
Leah, I'm sorry, I don't know if you can hear me.
Yeah.
Are lists and arrays synonymous? Like, are they considered the same thing, or are they totally separate? Just in the Python world. I mean, I know some of us might be used to arrays in other languages, but when you're talking to somebody that's familiar with Python, should I be saying lists or should I be saying array?
I would say they're synonymous. Sorry. Yeah, I would say so. That's actually a great question. I haven't thought about that one before.
All right, I'll scribble it down. Keep going.
Yeah. So yeah, you can just print out lists just using a print statement. So you see I called print str_list. And so as you'll see, I typically do a short form usually. So str refers to string, int, integer, bol, I'm just shortening Boolean. And I decided not to shorten float because I didn't. And in Python, and we'll talk about this a little bit more when we get to what I'm calling our function section, but there are built-in functions that we can call. And so one of these we've been using for a while now is print. So this is built in. You don't have to, you can use it wherever you want. You don't have to declare it. If you put print, your IDE just knows exactly what you want it to do, and you don't have to do anything special. Another one that we have is length. So this just tells you the length of the list. So in this case here, I'm saying print the length of the list integer underscore int underscore list. And so the length is 5. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So it just prints the number of items that are in the list.
So basically this one, like when in Python, it doesn't start with 0, it starts with 1.
So I was just counting the number of items in the list. In Python, it does start at 0. So the first element is 0. And actually, this is a great segment because
I'm sorry.
It's okay. We're going to cover it the next anyway.
I'm so sorry.
That's okay. I've got it here. So as you can see, next thing we're going to talk about is indexing, which is your exact question. So the first element in the list is 0. The second one is 1 and just continues on.
Mm-hmm.
And so you can index, so you can access the 0 element by just putting 0 into square brackets, and that will get you the first element of the list. You can also access the last element, and you could do that 2 different ways. If you use -1, Python automatically knows that you're accessing the last element in the list. You could also reference it by, if you know the number of items in the list, and subtracting 1.
Mm-hmm.
Because if we were to call, and we know that list has 4 elements, this will produce an error.
Mm-hmm.
Just because
for him it's like 3 instead of 4.
Well, it's gonna, yeah, it's an index out of range.
Mm-hmm.
And so, do you have another question?
No, I was like, okay, thank you. No, it's just because like it printed 5 at first, so I was like, oh, that's interesting. So that's why I was wondering. Didn't mean to go ahead.
Yeah, no, it's printing 5 because there are, for the example up here, there are 5 elements in the list, but the length of the list is 4. Because we're starting at 0, so you're doing 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. So there are still 5 indexes, but because we start at 0, it's like we only have 4. Yeah, the indexing can sometimes get a little bit tricky. It's something you have to pay attention to, especially when we talk about loops later on, just because at least I've found a common error that kind of happens when you first start programming is you try to go to the end of the list, so you go by the number of elements, which causes that out of index error because you've gone 1 too far, and you've also skipped the first element because you're starting from 1 instead of 0. And so you can do strings and lists. Like I said, you can also check to see if a letter is in the list. So in this case, I'm checking to see if letter underscore list has a item that is an A. And it is true because letter underscore list does have an item with an A. And I shall comment out some of this out. Just that way. And so here we're going to check to see if 2 is in the list. And so when we're using in, it's automatically going to produce a Boolean just because we're checking a condition. So we're looking like for a true or false answer. And it's false. Okay, so does anybody have any questions about lists before we move on? I know I'm kind of going, like, just kind of touching on it.
Can you have a list within a list kind of thing?
Yeah, you can have nested lists. They can get a little tricky, but yeah, you can have lists of lists of lists, and you can also do matrices. There's no restriction on the number of lists that you can have in a list. So in theory, you could have like 100 lists inside a list inside a list. It's, I mean, I wouldn't recommend it. It wouldn't be good style, but you could absolutely do that.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Yeah.
Let's go to style. No problem. Okay. So since we've been talking a lot about Booleans and like checking statements and that type of thing, the next thing I figured we should talk about is if statements. So if you guys have done any other programming languages, you'll kind of be a little bit familiar with if statements. I think they're a little bit nicer in Python because we don't need the curly brackets, for instance, as in Java. And I don't know, I'm a little biased. Python's one of my favorite languages, so I'm definitely biased, but I do like Java. I did years of Java. Java is a great language. I'm not hating on Java. I just think Python's a great first language. I also think it's a better first language over Java, but Java is actually my first programming language. So does anyone want to try and take a guess as to why I'm getting some error symbols right now for the first two, the second two lines? So you've got, I've assigned a variable hungry equals false, and then I've got if hungry is true, and then print I will eat an apple. Anyone want to take a stab?
I think maybe you're just calling something that doesn't exist.
Yes, that's definitely the first error. It's because, and if you'll see, this is one of the things I like about Pycharm. See how it says unresolved reference hungry? So this is telling me that hungry doesn't exist. It hasn't been assigned a variable, which is why there's an error. And yeah, Pycharm is great about this. It tells you what the errors are and gives you hints. Other programming languages like, IDEs, for instance, idle, you'll have to run the program first before, and then in the printout, it will tell you where all your errors are. I just like knowing where they are right away. So that's my first fix.
There's something there at the end. Yeah, I was just about to say. What's it looking for?
It is looking for a colon. So if statements and for loops and while loops, colons are your friend. You end with a colon. So this is one of the nice things about Python, in my opinion, is the fact that we don't need as many brackets. I like the fact it just ends with a colon. I do like Java. I honestly do. I know I don't sound like I do right now, but I do like Java.
Sounds like a campaign. I'm starting to.
Yes, I know. It is starting to sound like that. And yes, when you're running multiple things, you'll see here when I'm running stuff, I click on the thing, because if you hit execute from the console, it's just going to run the most recent thing that you ran, which is why when I hit this the other time, it produced the stuff from the lists thing, which threw me off for a second, but yeah. And we are on if statement, aren't we? And yes, anyone want to take a guess as to why I will eat an apple is not printing?
Because you assigned hungry as false, yeah.
Yes, so it's not there. So there are two ways that we could get this to print. One is we could reassign it, and I think that's going to be the best way to do it. And now it will print. So yeah, when you're checking a condition, always check to see what your variables are at the start, because sometimes, for instance, I mean, I set it up this way, but it did throw me off for a second because I forgot about it. I was expecting it to print, I will eat an apple. So I was sitting there for a second. I was like, why isn't it? I was like, oh, yes, because hungry was assigned to false. And so the if statement is false, so it doesn't print. And so you can also do mathematical expressions in your if statements. So, and we'll talk about math in Python after this bit, but this percentage here, this is the modulus operator. So this checks the remainder. So when you know when you do division, so if we divide 4 divided by 2, the result is 2 and the remainder is equal to 0. So in modulus, we're just looking at the remainder. So if you did 3 divided by 2 or 3% 2 for modulus, the remainder is 1. So mod 3% 2 would evaluate to 1. We'll go into this in more detail in the math section. I just wanted to show you guys that you can also do math in your if statements. It doesn't just have to be Booleans. It is still kind of a Boolean expression in a sense, but you're kind of checking to see whether or not the result of your math expression on the left side is equal to the result on the right. And you'll notice here I use the double equal signs because I'm doing a comparison. In Python, especially in if statements, always make sure you're doing a double equals. A single equals is a variable assignment, and you can't do a variable assignment in an if statement. So anyone have any questions about that first bit?
Just like on the first one, so you put earlier you put an exclamation mark with the hungry. So this is how you say is not equal to in the if statement?
Yes. That gets tricky. We can talk about that actually. Let's see. And what is it not liking? Yes. The problem I have. Oh, yes, it's not equals, and of course, why is my demo working? Yeah, when you put an exclamation mark, and the reason I'm having issues there is because I am missing a bracket somewhere, and maybe later we'll circle back to that example, but yeah, the exclamation mark is essentially a not symbol, so it's always going to be the opposite. It's going to annoy me. This is actually my first time in a while teaching, so a little out of practice, so I'm slightly on the nervous side. I will circle back to that example once I figure out.
You're doing great. No worries. You're doing great. I commented, I wish you were my JavaScript teacher. Like this is like so crystal clear to me, the way you explain stuff.
Like, I'm glad. Yes, I've been mentoring with CLC for about 2 years, so I've done a lot of this, but yeah, I kind of went through some of our Python workshops and kind of grabbed what I liked and just kind of skipped the stuff that I don't like, because I know sometimes I find, especially for Python, they try to teach you everything at once and don't give you time to practice, which is why we're going to do a simple example before we move into SQL, just so you guys get a feel for it. With if statements, we have if, elif, and else. So essentially what we're doing is we're checking the first if statement. So if, and in this case, a equals 1 and b equals 2. If a is less than b, we're going to print option A. Else if, so if isn't true, the next thing we're going to check is if a is greater than b, we're going to print option B. Else, which means if a is not less than b and a is also not greater than b, we're going to print option C. So in this particular instance, for the else, what we're saying is a is equal to b. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Great. So does anyone want to take a stab at what the result of this if-else statement is going to give us?
Option A.
One. Yes, I believe you are right. And oh, it was already on my screen, but yes, option A is correct. So the next thing I thought we'd talk about is, anyone want to take a stab at what is wrong with these statements here?
Well, there's no relation as far as I could tell. There's something going on there with the it doesn't like that space, I suspect, with the colon. Is that one problem?
No, that's, I mean, it's better form to not have the space there. Does the IDE care that the space is there? Not necessarily. It might, but it's not the one I'm going for. We talked about it a little bit earlier. It's kind of something to do more kind of like over here.
Yeah, it's like we're expecting a Boolean expression, and that isn't a Boolean expression.
Yes, it's an assignment. We're saying essentially is if, and then we're assigning x to equal 1, and we can't do that because it's not a Boolean expression. We're just assigning a value. So if we were to do equals, we'd be good. And then anyone have a guess as what our second issue is? And as you can see, the extra space, it's saying that there's a white space before the colon, but it will still run with the white space there. In terms of just like proper formatting and everything, we should get rid of the space, but Python will run with it. It doesn't care.
X isn't divided.
And this one will be a little tricky because
X isn't divided.
Yes, x is not defined. That's why we've got the error. So if we did x equals 0, then the error is going to go away. And then the issue with y is also the same. Because y is not defined, we're getting a red symbol. And so that would fix all of our errors. And then my second question was, anyone want to take a stab as to what this if-else statement will print?
-1.
No, I think it's a similar. You're saying there's an error to this, right?
Nope. We're just gonna run this. There's no errors.
Okay.
No, I'm just seeing if you guys can kind of guess what it's going to print. Is it going to be n or is it going to be m? Because we've just assigned the two values there. And one of the nice things about Pycharm is if there's an error and it looks like I'm trying to trick you, there will be red lines underneath. So it's an immediate indication. It's one of the things I like. It's a great IDE for a beginner because any mistakes you make, it will let you know immediately. You don't have to wait. You're like, okay, there's a red line, and you can hover over and be like, okay, I've made a mistake. What's wrong? And it will tell you how to fix it. That, or it will give you enough information that you can Google it and then come back and be like, okay, this is the issue. I'm going to fix it this way. So I heard that it guessed.
Please, m, print m.
Let's take a look, and it was -1. So yes, that was the answer. And so I don't know. Someone did say -1, so I didn't trick them. But one of the things I did here, I'll kind of highlight it, is see how I did -m here?
Mm-hmm.
You can, it's just kind of like math. So you can throw in other stuff when you're evaluating an expression. So I could also put a negative over here. So I'm just kind of doing math at home. I'm multiplying n by -1 by doing this. And I'm also doing the same, multiplying m by -1. And it doesn't, Python doesn't care because it's still a Boolean expression. I'm just kind of playing around with it on both sides, but I'm not breaking any rules, which is why the IDE is totally fine with it.
Okay, so this is negative, this is multiplying, right?
Yes. Oh, it's a simplified version of multiply. We'll kind of go
because sorry, go ahead.
It's doing arithmetic on the logic expression, right?
Right.
Instead of putting the number there, you essentially just gave it a variable and it's still doing the arithmetic regardless.
Correct.
Okay.
Because what I thought it was minus. So can you go a little bit up?
Here, I'll go back to, where was I? Over here.
Yeah. So what I did in my head was like 1 is less than -2, because I thought that minus m was like minus -1 kind of thing.
No, so that's, in this case, it's multiplication. And we're going to do math in the next section. But math in Python is fairly straightforward. So addition is still the addition symbol, subtraction still the subtraction symbol. Division can get a little tricky because we have a lot more options for division than, and multiplication, it's the star symbol. So I can show you guys that now. So start with addition. So for addition, it's just like we do when we were in school. It's just 1 plus 2. It's the addition symbol. It's and we could also be doing stuff in the Python console. I'm writing on files just because I kind of set everything up already. But you can also, and there we go. No. You can also do stuff, there we are, in the console. And so when you're doing stuff, I'll talk specifically about, actually, Pycharm. I'll be referencing Pycharm, but same for all the other IDEs. If you don't want to save what you're doing, just use the console and kind of figure out what you're doing beforehand. If you want to save it and come back to it, definitely create a file, and that way you can save it, review it later on, and you've got all your information. But yeah, and where was I? Here we go. So, like I said, addition, it's exactly like when we did it in school. It's just 1 plus 2. Nothing fancy about it, nothing special. Subtraction is exactly the same. And so, like I said, Python doesn't care about the spaces, so we could also get rid of the spaces. So it could just be 2 minus 1. It just doesn't care. Next, we'll talk about multiplication because division is a little special. So multiplication, I think the symbol's fairly similar. So it's the star symbol. So if you're on a Mac computer, it just be Shift-8, and that gives you the star. And it works as you'd expect. So division, we have different types of division in Python. So the first type is the type you'd expect. It's a single slash, and this is just going to give us 1 divided by 2, 0.5. It works exactly as you remember it from school. Floor division is a special type of division. And so with floor division, and you'll see from the example, essentially you get rid of the decimal symbol. So if we were doing regular division, 5 divided by 2 would equal to 2.5. Because we're doing floor, it means round down to the nearest whole number. So 2.5 rounds down to 2. And in floor's case, it always rounds down. So if it's 2.98, it's still going to go down to 2. And we can see that here. So let's see. What is the good?
So what is the what's the default divide? Does it doesn't do any rounding whatsoever?
Correct. It just works as you'd expect it to work in when you're doing math. So
I guess so. My follow-up question, is there a ceiling division?
There is.
All right.
Yes. Division special in Python. It's a lot of fun because you get a lot of different options. You get a lot of different options. There's also Modulus. And and that's not a great example. I'm just trying to show you guys that it always rounds down. I'm just trying to. Anyone know a good example that will give us a decimal that's greater than 5 right now off the top of the head? Because the first number I grabbed was 9, which bad example there.
7 divided by 4.
7 divided by 4. Yeah. It always rounds down.
Wow. Okay. Huh.
Yeah. I just wanted to show you guys that because I know sometimes especially when you talk about rounding, when it's above like 0.5, typically you expect it to kind of round up. With floor, it always goes down. And that's just something you have to remember. I don't have any examples for ceiling, so when you're going up, but it always rounds up. So it's the opposite of floor. So floor, always down, ceiling, always up. And it always rounds to the nearest whole number. And so then we kind of brushed up against Modulus earlier. So it's going to give you the remainder of the, and I grabbed this definition from Wiki because I kind of liked it. It's the remainder of the division of the two operands rather than the quotient. So if we were doing division, 5 divided by 2 would give us 2.5. Because we're doing this in a different way, the 5 is actually, sorry, it's 1. The 5 is part of the decimal, so we don't really care about it. The best way I guess to look at it would be, so 2 times 2 equals to 4. The plus 1 is our remainder, why it's equal to 1. Does that make sense, or did I just kind of confuse everybody there? We still good? Yeah. Great. Okay. Next thing, and I was going to...
Just a question. So I don't know if I'm mixing up my classes here. So we have float division. Do we have math random too? Oh, I'm just mixing up my class. Okay.
Yeah. So we are going to talk about that later. But
Sorry.
That's okay. No, I don't mind jumping around. So like I said, there are built-in functions. There are also these things called libraries. So libraries store built-in functions, like functions that have already been built and you don't need to use. So there's the math library, which stores the what was the function that you said again?
Random.
Random. So random is an random int is a function of the math library. And so we are actually going to be using random and talking a little bit more about those functions when we build our username. Does anyone have any other questions about math before we move into loops? Okay. So now we've got loops. So for loops, the two main ones are for or while. For loops, we also have something called range. Range is another built-in function. And I've got a few different examples with range, and we'll kind of break it down step by step. So this first one is for num in range 3. The input of range, so the number 3, there are 3 different options for this input. You can have the start, the stop, and the step. In this case, when there's only one number, we're just giving the stop. The start and the step are automatically assumed. The start is automatically assumed to be 0, and the step is automatically assumed to be 1. So I'll show you guys, and always check to see what you're running first. So in this case, it printed 0, 1, and 2. And I'll just quickly comment this out because we started at 0 and then we printed 1 because that was the adding 1. So that was our step. And then we printed 2 because we're increasing by 1s. It stopped at 2 because 3, the index starts at 0, which means that 3 wouldn't go all the way to 3. It'd be 3 minus 1 is our stop, which is 2, which is why it printed 0, 1, 2.
So like a little bit like the list?
Yes, exactly.
Gotcha.
Yeah. Length, and this is true for everything in Python and any types of indexing, you always start at 0. You don't start at 1, which means that you stop at the length of the list minus 1. If we wanted for it to print 3, we'd have to go up to 4. And just going to finish commenting stuff out. I was reviewing this earlier, and I just want to make sure. Oh, and the comment symbol, as I think you kind of all may have guessed, it's just the number symbol. So if you're on a Mac, it's Shift 3. And it's saying, oh, because I forgot to comment out and this is actually a great example error message. So in Pycharm, you'll see here, so it's saying in this file, so I called this CLC workshop, and this is the folder. The file is loops.py. It's saying line 8, which is this line here, and it's saying that print I, name error, name I is not defined. So that's telling me that my variable I hasn't been defined, which means, or the other error symbol if you hover over it is unresolved reference. I doesn't exist. I've never assigned anything to it. So Python's essentially saying, why are you asking me to print this when you haven't said what it is? We don't know what this is. What are you trying to do? So you'll see we just printed 0, 1, 2, 3 because we started at 0. We went to the 4th index, which because we started at 0 would be number 3. And we went one step at a time. We're going to do a couple more examples because range is very useful. It can be a little bit confusing, which is why I've got a couple different ones. Okay, so in this case, I've given 2 different values. So I've given 0 and 3. 0 is the start. That means you're starting at 0, and 3 is the stop. So it's saying, and the step isn't defined, so Python automatically assumes you're taking a step of value 1. So you're going to go 0, 1, 2. That makes sense? Am I going too fast? Thumbs up if we're good.
Go through that one more time.
Okay. In this particular instance, range, like I said, has 3 different inputs that you can put in. You've got start, stop, and step. In this example, our start is at 0. So that means the first number that we're going to be printing here, because what I'm saying is for I in range, and essentially that means in this case, it's going to be for I in 0, 1, 2, print I. So you're going to print 0, print 1, print 2. And because we started at 0 and we are stopping at 3, and because we haven't defined the step is automatically assumed to be 1.
Okay. All right.
And so then this one, we've put all 3 values in for range. So we've got our start is 0, our stop is 10, and our step is 2. So you'll see here, we went 0, 2, 4, 6, 8, because we're stepping by 2 every time.
And sorry, what's the default if you didn't have that third parm?
It's 1.
Gotcha.
It's positive 1. You can also you can also use negatives for steps 2. You could also use negatives for your starts and your stops. Yeah. If you're using negatives, for instance, we could change this. You could go -10 to 10, and this will still work. It starts at -10, and then you add 2, so you go to -8, and you add 2, you go to -6, and et cetera, until you get to 8, because 10 is where we're supposed to is the length. So you stop 2 before 10 because of the step.
I'm almost, when I look at the for statement, everything kind of comes back to JavaScript for me. It has a similar setup. It's a little bit different though. But I almost think JavaScript, you always have to have that third, right? Like for statement is you assign what I is, for example. Then the next one is how to iterate. But then there's always the stop, right? And that earlier, you indicate how it's going to iterate. I think it's, so you define it. How is it in JavaScript? It's you declare it, then it's the stop. So it'd be like I less than something, and then how to iterate. You always have to define that in JavaScript, right? You can never assume it's going to step by 1. But here in Python, it's always assumed. Wow.
Python, that's actually one of the things I like about Python. You can make some fairly easy assumptions. Like for instance, for num in range 4, you can just make the assumption that it's going to start at 0, because 0 is always where we start, and that it's just going to step by 1. Like you can make that natural assumption right away. You don't have to think about it. And if you want to make changes, you can define it. But you can just make assumptions about Python, and typically your guesses usually will be right.
That's
because
that's a handy. That's wow.
No, that's one of the reasons why I think it's a great language when you're kind of first playing around, especially with programming. It's a lot clearer and it's a lot easier to understand. You don't have to worry as much about syntax, and you can kind of, any assumptions that you make, you're typically going to be right. I mean, if you make weird ones or something, I mean, maybe not, but math is math. There isn't strange stuff. Division can be a little bit freaky sometimes just because there's so many different options. But division, if you're just using the single slash, it works as you expect. It's nothing strange. It's not difficult or complicated. Like I do like Python. So we can also loop through lists. So in this instance, and you'll see here, my Pycharm did not like the fact I had a space, because we do not like spaces. We like tabs. And for variable assignment, unless you're in a for loop or an if statement, you're always going to want to just have it right away. No spaces, no tabs. So for these 2 lines here, I'm just doing 2 things. First, I'm saying my list is going to equal to Canada learning code. So I've got 3 elements. One is Canada, second one is learning, and the third one is code. And then I'm assigning a variable length to be equal to the length of the list. And so length is another one of these built-in functions. I don't have to build it anywhere. It's just a built-in function in Python, which means I can just call it. And so length requires an input, which is the length of the object that you're putting in. And in this case, my object is a list. So it's just length is going to be equal to the length of my list. And then one thing which we could assign index a value out here. We don't have to. Because we're using range, it doesn't have to be assigned. And we'll see when we talk about while loops. The nice thing about for loops is for loops know that you just have to kind of stop there. While loops can be a little bit trickier. And oh, I did not realize, I have not been looking at the chat at all. So if anyone's been trying to.
I've been keeping an eye on the chat just to make sure if anyone had any questions, but.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, I have not been keeping an eye on it at all.
I'll just we're coming up on almost an hour. I don't know if anybody wants to take a bio break, if you want to put a thumbs up or just put it in the chat. Maybe give Leah just a quick breather. Does everyone want just like a quick 5-minute break, or should we just keep plowing ahead?
I could use a break.
All right.
Okay, that sounds good to me. I'm going to grab some water for sure.
Okay, let's come back in 5 or 10 minutes. You can talk amongst yourselves. You can just scoot off and do what you got to do, and we'll come back at 10 minutes, if that's all right for everybody.
Sounds good.
Okay, 10 minutes, everybody. Okay, I guess we're all coming back.
I think so, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Needed that break. Appreciate it.
No, I definitely needed to grab some more water too.
Is there any questions before Leah gets back into what looks like the end of loops and functions? Anything that we've covered so far? Comparisons. I'm really fascinated every time I see more of these examples, how it compares to JavaScript. But if anyone else has any questions, now's the time, I guess, to queue them up.
Yeah, feel free to ask anything about Python or, I don't know, Canada Learning Code, anything like that.
Usually I ask for the plug at the end, but you know what? I really want you to talk about that right now, if you could, just what Canada Learning the Code is all about, and what you organize and look over, I guess I should say.
So Canada Learning Code is a national organization, and we're a nonprofit organization. And currently, actually, all of our workshops are free and they're all online. Essentially, we want to get Canadians empowered and excited about coding. So we teach all sorts of different types of workshops. The one that is coming up in April for the Barrie chapter is Introduction to SQL, actually. So this one kind of fit perfectly with kind of what we're up to. But we do adults, kids, teens, girls learning code workshops, and we're just really excited about coding, and we like sharing our knowledge. And when we run our workshops, we have one instructor and we have 4 learners to every mentor. So you've got a mentor you can ask questions, you've got instructors you can ask questions, and it's a lot of fun. Yeah, I've been the Barrie chapter lead for almost 2 years now, and I did a little bit of mentoring before that. But yeah, I'm always at all the Barrie chapter workshops, and we do a lot of cool stuff. One we haven't done in Barrie yet, just because I haven't been able to generate the interest, but we did do a Shopify workshop in Markham, which I actually attended as a learner, which was a lot of fun. But we also do like WordPress, HTML, CSS. We do this learner kids thing called Scratch, which is kind of like introduction to like programming concepts, which is a lot of fun. Yeah, it's a lot of fun, and like come to our workshops. Barrie's always looking for people to come and to mentor.
I did how I found you guys. You actually had a workshop at Georgian College that I attended, and I think the lesson plan that you guys did was browser extensions.
Yes, that was in September, like 2 years ago, I think.
Yeah,
it was there.
And I when you look at a workshop, and if you've been kind of monkeying around with code over the years, you're kind of like, I already know that. I know this, I know that. But when I saw the workshop for browser extensions, I was like, I've never, ever seen anyone cover that as an intro. And I was just blown away. Like I didn't know the possibilities of just by a few lines of HTML, or I think it was some JavaScript, you could generate a little button on Chrome and have it do whatever. It was a real fun a workshop, but I was very impressed how it was organized, and the presenters and the mentors that were there. It was a well done event. So
I'm really glad you enjoyed that. Yeah, I was actually one of the mentors at that one. But yeah, all of the online workshops, they're about, for adults, it's about 2 hours. We used to do like a full day workshop, just because we're online and stuff. And as we all know, being online for like several hours can be kind of draining. They're about 2 hours now, but they're definitely a lot of fun. And yes, if you guys are ever interested in like a particular topic or something, just kind of let me know and I'll see what's available, because I'm always interested in running workshops if I know there's an interest. Because right now, I'm the only Barrie chapter lead, so I kind of get to pick what we do. I wanted to do.
Have you guys done any workshops during COVID?
Yes, we have.
Okay.
Let me see, when did we do? The first workshop I did for the Barrie chapter online was around August. And we did, I think, 3 or 4 before December. We did 2 kids programs in February. March was a busy time for me work-wise, so we didn't do any. We're ramping up now to like more regular workshop programming till about December. So we'll be doing about 1 a month, but we have chapters all across Canada. So if something at Barrie like doesn't fit for your schedule or anything, we have chapters all around, so at different timings. So for instance, I attended one workshop where the time difference, they were like 2 hours behind us. So I was able to do that workshop and then go run my own, because I like going to some of them too.
So that's the other neat thing, is that every chapter is following the same kind of, okay, that I was really impressed with that too, because you always worry about that. If you go to a different club in a different city, like maybe they'll be covering different things at different times. But the fact that the same workshop was shared across all the chapters, I thought that was really efficient for one, but then it also kept the quality of the lesson consistent. So
yeah, no, we all have access to all the same, like we'll all run the same, we have all access to the same content. We're not always running the same workshops at the same time. Although admittedly, lately we've been running a lot of introduction to SQL, because everyone seems to be in love with SQL, which I think is great. Like, I love SQL too, don't get me wrong. So that one's been pretty popular. So we have run a lot of those lately, but.
So if you want to learn a particular language, how does that work? Like, you have to do a request or get in touch with a teacher?
So we run workshops. So we'll pick, like, there'll be a workshop topic. So, and we have slides and stuff. And actually, we'll see how timing goes, because I don't want to keep you guys for too long. But when we do,
because you really teach very well. I did. Well, I don't want to because I had like amazing teachers. Like, the teachers I have are the most supportive one I've ever had. Like, they are really true teachers. But it's true that I had like a little bit of it was a little bit challenging for me to learn JavaScript. But when like you explained it, it was like so clear. And I was wondering, and we do have tutors at school as well. But I was wondering, like, if there's anyone that can tutor. Like, obviously I can go online and do it, which is totally fine. But if I have, like, for example, to ask question or stuff like that, I was wondering, like, if you have any volunteer or you have any teachers, or you just do like workshops on a specific topic.
Currently in Barrie, we're only doing the specific workshops. We have been playing around with the idea of kind of like doing a drop-in thing for 2 hours, like once a month, where people can come in and ask questions about resumes and that type of thing. Mm-hmm. Some of the other chapters in Canada have done that successfully. So it is something that we're open to. We haven't had the interest up until now. If it's something that I see there's interest for, I will try and get something started like that. But currently, yes, we're just doing workshops monthly. And yeah, it's really based on interest. We have tried, and also it's based on the instructors that we're able to get access to. Python is a great language, and I really enjoy it. We have had some trouble getting people to teach Python in the past. It's typically when I'm doing the workshops, I'm actually the one kind of producing. We call it the producer role. So I'm kind of behind the scenes, making sure everything's running and stuff. And we have like a separate instructor just because there's 2 roles. Barrie hasn't done a Python one yet online, more because I would like to teach Python. I really enjoy teaching Python, but
cool.
I can't currently do 2 roles at the same time. So
what can you do with Python? The reason I'm asking is because for my first semester, when I did programming fundamental, I was taught C#. And I guess this is the reason why I was taught C# is because I now do stuff in ASP.NET, which is built on C. But I think that if I would have learned Python, that would help me a lot too, because it's a lot of English is similar. For example, for PHP, instead of print, there's echo. For JavaScript, there's loops and arrays. And well, for C#, I do ASP.NET. And now I'm wondering, for Python, what can you do with Python?
Python is a pretty powerful language. You can do a lot of different stuff with it. Like when I was in school, I took a data science course and we used Python for that. Sometimes people will use Python for like beginner artificial intelligence courses. Python's a great way to kind of understand the basics and like learning recursion and functions and everything. Python's great for figuring out how to understand how something works and all the steps and algorithms and stuff. It gives you a great foundation, and then you're able to branch off and do other things. For work in the past, I've built like web scrapers using Python. It's powerful. It has a lot of different things that you can do with it. Probably can't list them all just because there's so many.
I have a friend who actually teaches Python, and he was like, you know what? It's so easy that the grandma in the village can actually learn it.
If we're talking about a web development, because some of the people here, they're more probably familiar with just web development. Django is the go-to. Is that correct? Or Flask, or there's a whole bunch of them, is there not?
Yes, there's definitely a ton of them. My personal background, I'm more on the programming side. Web development is something I'm playing around with. I've actually taken a course in web development. Yes, but my foundation, I studied in computer science in school, so I'm way more familiar with the programming languages than I am with web programming. It's still something like I'm playing around with it and everything. And I find, especially with Python, it gave me a great foundation. It's a lot easier for me to figure things out because I understand the basics of coding and how algorithms work, which makes it easier for figuring out how to do things in different languages. I find like Python gives you a lot of like transferable skills, and you're able to understand what's going on. You might not know the syntax right away for a new language, but you understand what the steps are to make the algorithm work. And once you kind of know how to do that, it's a lot easier because you can go like, okay, I know what needs to happen here. I know basically how to write it. I just need to change it so it's in the different language type of thing.
Right. Huh. All right. I think we're ready to go. Unless there's any other questions people have. All right.
One question for me: How would one get involved in maybe the Canada this Canada coding thing?
Canada Learning Code.
Canada Learning Code, yeah.
I can send the link. Actually, I do have the link saved. Yes, I do.
Maybe even exploring helping out with like teaching and stuff. Maybe.
Yeah. So we've got a volunteer. This is the website. We also have a Facebook page, so you guys can message me on there too. Or the email address for the Barrie chapter is barrie@canadalearningcode.ca. So if you just send a message, we actually have a Slack group for our instructors and our mentors, and there's like weekly like little coding challenges, and you can mentor and help out at the kids workshops, at the adult workshops. If there's something that you are passionate about and you want to share your knowledge, then just kind of reach out and let us know, and we always are looking for volunteers and people to kind of share their love of coding.
That's all right. Awesome. Wonderful. That'd be cool.
Okay. So if there aren't any other kind of questions, I was going to move back into talking about Python. I'm not going to rush through everything. I am slightly worried how much we're going to get into SQL, just because I find the worst thing to do is to rush through a topic.
Well, you know what? we could save SQL for another night. I know you're gonna have to like kill one of your loves. So, but yeah, if you're doing such a good job with Python, we can just go as far as you want with this. Then we could save SQL if you want for another night or another evening if you're up for it.
Yeah, no, definitely. I'm really enjoying this. Yeah, I think that might be just kind of the best thing because I want you guys to I do want to talk about functions because functions are fun. And I want you guys to have the opportunity to kind of do some coding on your own and ask me questions. It's honestly the thing that we're going to do at the end. It's a fairly simple username generator. It's not like crazy complicated or anything. It's just going to touch on like a bunch of different topics that we've already talked about. So like lists and concatenating lists and just kind of looping through things. And it'll touch on functions a little bit too. It just gives you the opportunity to play around. Okay. Perfect. Well, then we've kind of finished with we're almost done with our for loops. So yes, like I said earlier, you can loop through lists. And as you can see here, we just looped through the list, my list. So we printed out Canada learning code. And it worked pretty well there. And so the reason why all three printed, because it's a little tricky, which right here, we are indexing. So if you guys remember from when we talked about lists, you index by doing the square brackets, which is why all three are printing. Because for instance, if I didn't have list, what's it doing? This will be easier for okay. So these two things are exactly the same. I am looping through this and I'm indexing. If I was going to be, because I'm indexing, everything's getting printed. If I were just looking at this by doing the
value, right?
Yeah, if I was doing it by the value, if I was just going to, because we're indexing, we're calling the values 0, 1, and 2, which is why everything's getting printed. And I wonder if I still have this example somewhere. You can still run into issues where not all the values are getting printed for a list. In this case, we're fine. I find for me personally, it happens when I'm looping through the letters in a thing. Let me see if I can break this, which we'll see. My underscore list. Let's do. Something like that. That should break it. And it does not. Of course, I've gone on and on about how, you have to be very careful about your stuff. And then when I'm doing, strings, I can't break it. Although I guaranteed the other example, which I removed, it was broken. And I removed it because I didn't want to spend too much time on it. But yes, when you're indexing, indexing should work for lists. Obviously, after I say this, someone's going to come up with an example where I'm wrong and it breaks. But typically, not always, and I'm going to stress, not always, this usually works. And in our case, it's working. Does anyone have any questions here? No? Okay, so while loops. While loops, I would actually say, are a tricky part of Python. So for for loops, we talked about how, especially for range, and this is one of the reasons why I used range for my example. For range, we have a start and we have a stop and a step. For while loops, there is no default stop, which means that if you're evaluating, let's say if in this case we have, well, num is less than 3, we're saying that stop at 3. There's also no implicit step. So we can get stuck in an infinite loop. So for instance, if we just did this, and what we're saying is, well, num equals 0, and well, num is less than 3, print num. There's no implicit start or stop or step. So we've defined our start as 0. We've defined our stop at 3, but we haven't defined a step. And so what's going to happen? And it's just going to keep going. So this is an infinite loop. You have to stop it. It will not stop on its own. And infinite loops are one of the reasons why I don't like while loops.
You're muted, Paul.
Yeah, I was going to just say that's a good argument not to use them.
They can be good to use sometimes.
Right, but I can see how leaning towards another solution would be beneficial, because I can see a simple mistake right here. If you forgot how to iterate it, yeah.
A good place to use while loops is if you're trying to evaluate a condition in a loop, so you're not sure where it's going to stop or where it's, as long as you're sure that the condition is going to at some point be true. As long as you're true, like false, not true, false. While it's true, it will keep going. When it turns to false, when the condition and value is to false, it stops. So
there's a good argument. Yes. Okay.
Yeah, there is a good argument, but if you're just going to be looping through like a list where you know for sure where it starts, where it stops, and everything, and then I like for loops.
Yeah, that makes sense. Wow.
Yeah, while loops, you're going to want to, you have to be very careful, and this is an area where I find, especially for beginners, while loops are where you might get tripped up, because infinite loops can happen, and you also have to be very careful when you're evaluating your expressions. You have to make sure that at some point the expression is going to turn to false, because while this num is less than 3 is true, it just keeps going. As we saw, it will just keep going and going and going. And if you look, I have like tons and 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 tons of zeros.
I have a question. Do people still use while loops, so it's just like, oh no, not using that, I'll use one, like I did choose something else?
No, while loops are great. Like I said earlier, for Boolean evaluation, while loops are better than for loops, because if you're looking for, if you know something is going to happen but you're not sure where or when you can use a while loop, and that will it will evaluate the expression. It's great for Boolean evaluation. If you're just looping through a list or just doing numbers, that type of thing.
It's funny you say this. I rarely do it. Yeah, it's almost as if they always teach while last, because if you think about it, a lot of things that you program, it's like you never jump to, well, we'll just throw in a while there. It's always you start with a for loop, or you start with something else, and then I could see its usefulness just for setting up triggers, where if you want to just go through, like you said, for sure there's an end to something, well, then you want to steer away from them, because you're almost setting yourself up for a situation where,
it will definitely break the program for sure.
Just for me to understand, because I got an example and I still remember that example I got. So a while loop is just another loop, right? Yeah. Because I thought a while loop was like, loop this while we're doing this. And the example I got, it was a Tim Horton example. They were like, okay, I'll just say men, women, toddlers. So if a man, for example, ordered a panini, and then the woman ordered a chocolate, and then the kid ordered a donut. So it's not, if you were like to do for a loop, it will go like 1, 2, 3. But what the example he gave us is just, it's not because the man was first that the panini is going to go first. So the way he explained it is like, while they're doing the hot chocolate for the woman and serving the donut, they are preparing the panini. So that's how they explain the while loop, and I got all That's
that's a bad example.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say.
They're
No,
just
like
the word can be confused as like multitasking. I was
that's what I thought
this.
the while loop was, like, while you do that,
Yeah.
do this, or while in the loop, do that.
okay, there is something in Python that does do that. That is something you can worry about in the future. For a while loop, essentially, it's kind of like a for loop, except for you have to define when it stops, when it starts, and when it ends.
Yeah. That example, the panini, like, no. Yeah, there should have been some feedback saying that example doesn't apply here. I don't. Yeah, I could see some confusion there.
And one thing you'll see here, when I write it in a second, I'm increasing the value of num by 1 each time, and I'm using a shortcut. So you see there's a plus and then it equals. This is exactly the same as this, but it's a shortcut. It's just a simpler way of writing it. But both of them are completely valid ways of doing it. I just did it the other way because we could say I was being lazy, or I just wanted to show you guys the shortcut. But you'll see it just printed 0, 1, and 2 because when num hit, actually, no, this will be good. So we started at 0. So the first time we go through, 0 equals 0, num equals 0 plus 1. So num now equals 1. 1 is still less than 3. So we go into the while loop. So it becomes 1 plus 1 equals 2. And then we go through the while loop. 2 is less than 3. So we print 2. 2 plus 1 equals 3. So on our next iteration, 3 is not less than 3, which is why it's broken. So if you're going to be evaluating a while loop, I recommend, and it's just like a simple thing like this, I actually recommend writing it down. I'm old-fashioned and I like paper and pencil. You can totally write this out in code too. Just going through and making sure you understand how each iteration is going to work and how the value changes. And then that way you'll be very confident when you're using while loops, because for loops are a lot easier in my opinion. It's more instinctive. You kind of know what's going on. You know for sure you're not going to break it. In the same way, it's very hard to get an infinite loop in a for loop. It's not impossible. You couldn't really do it with range. You could somehow figure out how to do it. It's possible. Incredibly unlikely. You would truly have to take some time and really think about how to do it. Possible, unlikely. With a while loop, fairly easy to get stuck in an infinite loop. Okay, so the last thing we're going to kind of talk about before we play around a little bit is functions. We won't do too much on here. I just wanted to talk about like built-in functions as well as kind of writing your own, and then we'll get to do our username generator. So does anyone have any last questions about loop before I move on to functions? Okay, perfect. So we talked about this a little bit earlier. There are libraries. Libraries store functions. These functions have already been written, so you just import the library. So for instance, here I did import random. So I'm importing the random library, and the random library has a bunch of functions, and you would just call them from the library. It lets you access them. The second type of function is like the built-in functions. These ones are automatically there. So the libraries have already been imported. When you download Pycharm or Python for the first time, they're there for you to access. They're like print, length, they're already defined. You don't have to do anything to use them. Then there's the third type of function, and these are the ones that you make yourself. So I've just given like a couple of simple examples. So the first one here, I know my comment says check if a number is prime. That's the one that's 2 below it. This first one, all I'm doing is I'm adding the value to n. So the other thing we should talk about is return. Return exits a function. So when you hit a return statement, you leave the function. It's done. It stops. Game over. If that makes sense. So I'll show you guys the first one. So add to n. So you just call it. And because we're kind of just doing intro, there's neater ways to do this. I'm just kind of going over how to explaining everything and just kind of giving you guys an introduction. So we'll run the add to n. And what is it saying here? See line 40. Just apply line. Oh. And I do not have random imported on here. That is okay. So in this particular case, it added up to n. So we started at, what did I put? 5. So it started at 0 equals 0 plus. We added 1 here, and then on our second loop, we added 2 to 1. And then our third loop, we added 1 plus 2 plus 3. And our fourth loop, we added 4 to our sum. And then, yeah, we stopped there. Does that make sense?
I'm so sorry. Can you just go for it one more time?
Yeah. So we assigned val to equal to 0. And the reason that we did this is because it lets us add to it. So when we're going through the for loop, the first time we go through the for loop, I equals 0. So we're saying we're going to assign a new value to val in this statement. So val currently equals 0 and I equals 1. So now val equals to 0 plus 1, which equals to 1. The second time we go through the loop, I now equals 1. Our val equals to 1 because it's already been defined. So now we're going to do 1 plus 1 equals 2. So val now equals 2. On our third iteration, val I equals to 2, and val equals, what am I at?
It goes to 2 plus I, which is
To
1.
say it out
It's
loud.
3. Gotcha. I got you. I'm sorry. I got you.
Yeah.
To say it out loud over and over. That's, yeah.
Yeah, no, I lost my place for a second. I was like, I know we're going to get to 10, but I was like, I feel like we're missing. So yeah.
So in this example, yeah, just to show the comparison. So if you did another another run of this function, but you changed that 5 to another number, we're going to see, depending on the return, we can backwards rationale too. Like I'm already thinking, if you'd specified 10, then in the function, n gets passed in, it goes through 10 times, and so the value is going to be much different compared to,
because it's going to be, essentially it's going to be 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 plus 5 plus 6 plus 7 plus 8 plus 9. And because we assigned val outside of the for loop, we're able to save everything into val inside the for loop.
Mm-hmm.
Like for instance, if we didn't assign val in the for loop and then we were just printing, it wouldn't save it, because if we were just printing I, we're not saving I. So I would just print out as 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, if n equals 10. So it kind of lets us save it, if that makes sense. And then you'll see here, this n says return val. So it means return the value of val after the last iteration of the for loop. Okay. I'll move on to the next one. The next one's like a little bit easier. We're taking in an input, and this input is, I've just called it cost. And so you'll see, I haven't defined cost anywhere. I'm just saying that the input for GST underscore and underscore HST, my function, is called cost. I don't have to previously define cost. I just have to define it when I call the function. So in this case, I'm saying that the return value is going to be the GST and HST on cost. So for instance, if, let's say my cost is Let's do something simple, and let's call it $1. So I've assigned cost. I'm just gonna put that out. And yes, you'll see here, I commented something out, which is why it's right here, saying val is not defined. So we can get rid of that. And where is, there we go. And also see here, I had add underscore to n with the value of 10, which is why I was printing out 45. So $1 times 0.3 equals to 0.3. We just kind of did the math right there. And that's where that came from. So you don't have to define the input of a function. You just have to define it when you're calling the function. So I don't have to define cost before I'm defining the function. The function doesn't care about that. When you're calling the function, you have to define what your input's going to be. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay. And so in function.
Sorry, just I do understand what you mean here. Like totally. Like for example, if you are coding a calculator, you don't define the cost. It's whoever cost you put in the calculator, which is defined at the cost. It's just that you put the print down, so you haven't like actually like defined it on top. So that's why I was a little bit like.
Yeah. So first, when you're using a function that you've written yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And we're just talking about when it's all in the same file. We're not going to talk about global functions or anything. We're just going to keep this like fairly simple. So
yeah.
These functions here, they can only be accessed in this file. I have to do something special to let them be accessed.
Yeah, because it is an import file, eh?
Yeah, like I have to do something special for other stuff. Mm-hmm. We're just talking about when we're using the functions in here. So first, before you call a function, you have to define it. And then after it's defined, you can call it, and when you call it, you have to define the input that you're going to put in.
Right. It has to have a purpose. It can't just. Okay. Now I'm just thinking some functions that are void.
Are
they just like? Would it just be like a procedure? Like it's being called. It runs something, but it doesn't. Like it doesn't have like a functional purpose. You know, it's just like.
Well, off the top of my head, I can't think of a functional purpose. I'm definitely sure there are some. Off the top of my head, I can't. For instance, we could change this. And this, and we'll just do that 10. So this function here, GST underscore and underscore HST, this function now returns void. There is no return value, but it prints out the cost. So we're not returning anything, but because we have the print statement, we're still getting output.
Okay, it's still performing something, but it's not. Okay. Yeah. Okay.
So
you still need an input at the end of the day.
Yes, like for instance, I've just been printing these out and everything, but we can, for instance, and this is a built-in function input, we can assign a variable to a value of a function. So in this particular instance, when I call input asks for input from the user. So I can put in string, and so it's asking for a number. So I'm going to put in the number 5. Our print statement here is going to call the function is prime with the value that we inputted, which is 5. And then we're also calling the add to n function with a value 10 because that's the number I put in. We could also change this to val, and we can use this in multiple places. So I can also add in a different number. And this is an even number. This is why I like to break things. And it's important when you're first learning how to code, make mistakes and break things. if you are always getting everything perfect, then you won't understand how to fix things. And if you don't know how to fix something, then you won't be able to move on.
I love making breaky code. It's one of my, break, get it to work, break, get it to work, break. No, yeah, I totally agree with that statement. It's almost like we could talk about I think our first meeting we touched on a little bit, but TDD, test driven development, seems kind of a popular methodology in the industry lately. It used to be back, you would just write some code and okay, let's test. But now they almost have the philosophy, you make a test, then you code. And I mean, the whole philosophy, which is hard for someone, I think we've always been kind of taught to get it to work. And so when it breaks, we think that's a bad thing. And they kind of flipped it around and said, you want to start with something that doesn't work, and then you get it to work, and then you write the next test. And I don't know. Yes, I think that's helpful.
So there was something which I didn't talk about earlier, but that's how I managed to break it. Integers and strings don't really like each other. You have to make them be friends. So when you call input, so even though I put in the number 12, this is a string. It is not a number, which is why, as you can see here, line 27. So when I'm calling add to n, this function here expects n to be an integer. Well, I gave it a string, and a string isn't a number. So when you put range doesn't know what you want. They don't know what you're doing or anything at all. So it's like, full stop, this is an error, can't do this. You can do something called casting, where you change a string to an integer. And I did it over here. You just call int and then bracket, and then you put in your variable that you want to change, and then close the bracket. This is why this one did not break, but this one broke because n is expected to be an integer and not a string, but I gave it a string, which is why I was like, we don't like this. Okay, so does anyone have any questions before we go into our fun little username generator thing? If we're all good, then I'm just going to stop sharing for a sec while I switch to the slides that I have up. Okay. What page is this? Sorry, just want to check to make sure I'm sharing the right. This is number 35. Perfect. Okay, is this size okay for everybody?
That looks good.
Great. So we talked about libraries a little bit earlier. This one is the random library. So random is the library, and this is a function within the random library. That's why we're doing random.randint. We're telling Python that we want the randint, the random integer function that takes in the inputs x, y from the random library. So then Python knows this is what we want to use. And so in this particular instance, we're just going to grab a random number between the value of x and the value of y. The only rule here, like it says here, is x has got to be less than y, just because you want the smaller number than the bigger number. And then there's also another one, which is random.choice. And then mylist, this just picks a random item from the list called mylist. This will just make life easy for our username generator. And so we can do this, and actually, I'm going to go to that link that I sent everybody, the repl.it, just because I'm not sure how many people have Pycharm.
Yeah, it was from JetBrain, was it, or Or, oh, this, okay, yep.
I don't have Pycharm. But you did send a link, though.
I can send it again. Yeah, I can, if you guys have, I can send it again in the chat.
That's okay.
This kind of just, oh, you've got it?
Yep, no worries.
Perfect. So it lets you play with a bunch of different languages, which is great. We're going to grab Python, obviously. It will do a random fill. You don't actually have to sign up. Well, I mean, you do have to sign up. I can also give you guys the password to the Canada Learning Code one. We just let everybody use it, or you guys can create your own if you want to save your work. And essentially, it will just give us the exact same thing I was using in Pycharm. It's just this gives you a little browser. So you've got your console on the right-hand side, so you can do like I did. You can do I times 8, for instance. 8. And you, so like I said earlier, console is when you just want to do something quick, something easy. For instance, I want to see what the value of 1 times 8 was. Not a great example because we all know it's 8, but if you just want something super simple, console is great. If you want to save your work and kind of come back to it, do it in a file so you save it. So, and was I here? We're just going to copy all this into our handy dandy file here, and then we're going to execute. So we got green. So the first thing that happened was we imported the library called random. We declared a list called colors, and in colors, there's yellow, blue, green, purple, and pink. And then we said the variable random color is going to be any item in our list, and then we're going to print it. So if we run it again, it's yellow. It's just any, and then it's yellow again. It's just any random item in the list. It doesn't remember what it said in the past, so it can be anything. Okay, does everyone have this up or was able to access it? It will make life easier if you guys want to kind of do the user name generator. I can give you guys a second to go through and see. I marked down my slide, so we'll skip this one, this one, this one, and 40. So yeah, we're gonna end up with, and this is from Our Kids Learning Code, programming with Python. I actually think this, I got this from one of our other instructors. They've been using this when they're teaching teachers Python. So I actually think it's a great introductory tutorial. So don't be thrown off by the fact it's kids. I think it's great. So yeah, we're going to be declaring 3 different types of lists. So you're going to have adjectives, colors, and animals. You're just going to put whatever adjectives you want in the first one, any types of colors in the second, and animals in the third. So if everyone wants to try and do 3 different lists right now, well, I grabbed some water. And so these are just samples. There we go. And I am gonna, we'll leave this up actually. So I just declared 3 lists. Now, copying, you really shouldn't copy code. You should really write it out yourself. In my particular instance, I've done a lot of programming with Python, and also I'm worried a little bit about timing, just like running out of time and stuff. So I just wanted to copy it over. But yeah, take a minute or 2 and just define a list and just throw some random items in it. Whatever you want to add. I don't know if you're trying to say something, but I think you're muted. So I'll give everybody like another minute. Just put like whatever random type of thing you want to put in your lists. And then this way, Okay, so kind of give me a thumbs up if you think you've got like enough items in your list and kind of want to move on to the next bit. I'm seeing some thumbs up, which is great. Perfect. Okay, so I've seen a couple. So what we can do is you can do username, and so we're just creating a new variable. And then we can use our random library. And we've got 3 lists. And if you notice that all of our lists contain strings, this means that we can add them together. We can concatenate them. Because strings like strings, integers like integers, strings and integers do not like each other. But things of alike and like each other. And I forgot. So what I've done here is I've assigned the variable username, and the value of username is going to be, we're going to call it random.choice on adjective list. So it's going to pick a random item from our adjective list, and we're going to concatenate that to a random item from our color list, and then we're going to concatenate that to a random item in our animal list. So then username, we've come up with a random item, funny blue unicorn. So was anybody able to kind of create a username themselves, or anyone want to share what their username generator kind of popped out? I know we haven't had a lot of time, and like this is just like a very simple example. I just wanted to show you guys how like different things can work together. We used built-in functions. We used our lists. We've got concatenation of like adding strings together. We've got our variables, and we've also got functions from a library. So, and that is our SQL. And so, as we can see, ta-da, this is, I can do it. So you could also have done it this way, where you could have done, you could have assigned the variable adjective to a random element in the adjective list, and then the variable color to a random element in the color list, and the variable animal to a random element in the animal list, and then you could have added them all together and made it a username. I did it in 1 step, but you could also do it in 2. So does anyone have any questions? That's kind of where I thought we'd stop for Python. Yeah.
Just a question, because for me it seems to be the same, but with just like color with double quotation, color like yellow, blue, and green. It's a list for me, and color list, it's still a like I don't know how to explain that. It seems 2 different lists, but for me it seems like the same. Or is it 2 different lists because one has double quotation and one has single quotation, and one says colors and the obviously color list?
So both colors and colors lists contain strings. However, they are 2 different lists, because the list colors is a different variable than color list. And they also contain different things. And like I said, Python is case sensitive. So this yellow has a lowercase y. This yellow has an uppercase y. So these are 2 different strings. They're not the same.
But they're still, it's not because one is double and one is single. Both are still strings.
Yeah.
Okay, gotcha.
Any other questions? No? Okay, well, I hope you guys enjoyed this, and welcome to, I hope you guys had fun and love Python as much as I do now.
This was awesome. This is you know, you always hear about Python and you're like, yeah, I think I know how to use it. But then to go through it, it's like, oh wait, I didn't know you could do it with that. Oh wait, that's a pretty handy feature. So yeah, this was a fantastic primer. What do you recommend if we wanted to take it to the next step? You gave us like building blocks. Let's say we wanted to build a house now. What do you suggest?
So what I would suggest is everyone been on Stack Overflow before?
Quite a bit.
Yeah. So definitely use them for asking questions and stuff. And then there are tons of introduction to Python resources. There are also tons of books. If you're like me, I do actually have a book on Python. I know computer science, very high tech, but I do enjoy reading. So I do actually have a book, but they're all super useful. Python is a great beginner language. So it's actually really hard to teach it wrong. Not that I'm saying it's not possible, but if you just Google like introduction to Python, you can start like trying a bunch of different things online, and you can start playing around with things. Like you can start writing your own functions. You can, start learning about different types of programming steps and algorithms. You can learn about recursion. It gives you the opportunity to learn a lot of different things. Like personally, I find Python's great for learning all sorts of algorithmic things and like learning different algorithms and understanding how everything works, because you can work through it nice and slowly and kind of really figure out what's happening.
Yeah, that's excellent. I feel like, a lot of teaching is just web development. So you, to actually see a real programming language, and obviously, going back several years, a lot of data scientists, when that term first came out, people were using R and R Studio, and you'd always hear about it. R was the hot language, and then all of a sudden there was this huge shift to Python, and it hasn't shifted. The people that used to use R compared to Python, you hear them talk. They said, "Why would I go through the hassle? Python's so much easier. I'm just interested in the data, in like wrangling it to where it's helpful. Python does the job hands down." So that's an interesting indication, I think. But yeah, it just seems pretty straightforward. So we can obviously do data stuff. You said there is frameworks, right? If we were interested in doing web development.
Yes, there are frameworks. Like I said, I'm more programming than web development, so I actually haven't played around with them, but there are frameworks for sure in web development. But yeah, you can build a bunch of different things. Like for instance, in university, I worked for a psychology professor, and I wrote her I developed a Python program for her, and it would scrape YouTube comments for her. So I just collected all sorts of comments off of YouTube videos, and we just
really.
Yeah. So
oh man, wow.
You can Python's like a pretty powerful language. It's a lot of fun, and I think it's a great introduction language, like I said, because it's straightforward and you don't have to worry as much about syntax. I don't know if anyone's played around with Java yet, but Java and C, they care about brackets and how you end a line and all that stuff. Whereas as you see here in Python, it does not. Python knows that this is the end. I don't need to tell it it's the end. It knows.
And I guess I don't know if you mentioned at the top of this whole thing, but Python, you don't have to compile it.
You don't have to compile it before you run it. When you hit run, everything just happens. Like it compiles and executes all at once. You don't have to separately compile it. I know. Yeah, C. I know for C, you have to compile first and then you have to run it. I like the fact that Python is kind of like a one-step process, even though technically speaking, it is 2 steps, but you can just hit run and everything's done for you.
I am having some technical difficulties here. Sorry.
That's okay.
No problem at all. Does anyone have any question? What are the other languages that you teach? So you do SQL and you do Python?
Well, like this is like, yeah, I did teach this and everything. I would still consider myself to be a learner of the languages. I definitely don't know everything. I did attend university and I studied computer science, so I am familiar with a lot of languages. Python and SQL, I'd say, are my strongest. I do know Java and I could probably teach Java. I just would consider myself to be less confident. Python and SQL, like where I work, I actually do a fair amount of SQL right now. Really aren't.
I have a question in regards to SQL. SQL is the oldest language, and what I found extremely funny and interesting is that it's the oldest language that hasn't evolved. Like Python changed, JavaScript. Oh, you have like JavaScript. You have like JS, Node.js, jQuery. Like, but SQL like remain SQL. And I'm talking for myself, and I don't know for any other people, but up until now, me and some of my friends also like I find it very challenging, and it's very interesting because since it's something that has been here for a long time, so it's not as if you have to upgrade, it's still the same. And I don't know if you encounter the same thing when you're teaching, and if you do, so what do you think is the most challenging thing when it comes to SQL that we don't understand, or we have a hard time wrapping our hands around it? Like, yeah,
I would say understanding databases and how they work. It's not so much SQL is a query language, so it's how you access the database. I'd say usually the tricky thing, at least I found when I took the course and everything, was understanding how a database works, like what you're querying and like what you're accessing, and understanding more how the database works. Because once you understand the structure of the database, when you're running an SQL query, you understand where it's coming from and why the result is what it is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, that would. Yeah, it comes back to me as well. I'm like, like different kinds of table or third row, something like that, the primary key, and I'm like, yeah.
I've never heard anyone give that advice before for SQL, and that's
makes so much sense. 100%.
Yeah, no, I've never heard anyone talk about that. Like, this is how you tackle SQL. Like, yeah, it makes total sense. Because a lot of the thinking is it's almost as if you're accessing it via words, right? It's not like, but if we were going to give you a GUI, it would be go to table, select all the rows that do this, right? You'd be doing that with the mouse, but that's a good point.
Yeah, it's not procedural. That's the one thing. It's not like you know, if you're in the for loop mindset with a SQL query, I mean, that's the wrong mindset.
Yeah, like it's more, you have to understand, if I was going to pick a comparison to Python, and this is not going to be a great comparison, it's like first understand what is in your list before you try and access the list. But it's not a great comparison just because a database and like tables, they're more, the data in it is structured and there's a lot of information that you're going to be gathering. Whereas, I mean, a Python list, like our examples have been like fairly simple and they're not really structured the same way.
Yeah, once you start getting kind of three-dimensional, it's
that's what the word I was like looking for. I had this three-dimensional.
Yeah. Go to this row, select all this, and then now I think when we start learning SQLs, then they really take it to the next step where they start combining tables and you start doing
joins and stuff like
and it's like, oh, good golly, it's now it's stuffed up. It's
yeah, you start with like your select statements, and then you've got your froms, and then you've got your wheres, and then you've got your joins, and
then you got your unions. Those are awesome. And then you got your inner queries, so you're joining to like a couple of like unions, all like kind of it's there's some rather interesting thing. It's a different mindset to get around from.
I think we've all had the experience too where we may have asked the teacher, we said, okay, there's a 2-dimensional database, there's a 3-dimensional database, but is there a 4-dimensional? And you can just see the look on there. Yeah, and then you ask them a question. So how would you query this in a 4-dimensional database? And then, wow, well, it can be a head trip. And whenever somebody points out a tool, especially online, that can kind of give a visual rather than trying to go through text wise, it's always adds some clarity too. I see if you just talk in SQL, like table this, table that, it's like, okay, but if you can actually see the table in real time with some sample data, I think that just helps. And most tools, I suspect, have that feature. But
yeah, like I mean, it's super late, so we're not really going to run into this, but this is a great tool for when you're first learning SQL. It gives you tables and you can run through sample queries and everything. It's totally free. I'll put it in the chat now. It's actually what we use for our workshops. But yeah, it's free and you can kind of play around. They have a little demo table. It lets you play around with stuff. It's what we're going to be using in our workshop in April. But
do you during your workshops, do you ever talk about, I don't know what you would call it, like the antithesis or the opposite, like non-SQL, like MongoDB and
MongoDB, yeah.
Right? Because you people are like, SQL, I'm really starting to understand that. And it's like, no, you should use a non-SQL database. And then they're like, oh no, we're back to square one. So
yeah, our workshops, they're all designed to be introductions, so get people interested and encourage them to go on their own. I personally do not like MongoDB. I did have to do it for school. It is not. That was actually the first database I had to do. I do not recommend doing it that way. I like structured.
Yeah.
I like SQL. I like structure. It is much, much easier to understand than go to like a MongoDB. But yeah, all of our workshops are designed to be introduction, kind of like how I did the Python. We give you the tools to kind of understand all the basics, and then hopefully with those tools, you're able to slowly understand some of the harder concepts, and it slowly builds.
That's awesome.
We do have, I think we have an advanced like a HTML, CSS. Like after you've done our intro to CSS and HTML, we have like part 2 of it that goes in a little bit deeper. But for most of our workshops, it's just like an introduction that's like, hey, this is what Python is. This is how it works. These are like all the like little things that you need to know about it. Here's some tips. This is what you can do with it. And oh, look, you've built a username generator, for instance.
That's awesome. Yeah. That's a good workshop. When maybe you could plug this in. When did you say that you were having that SQL workshop?
The introduction to SQL for the Barrie chapter is going to be April 26th from noon till 2. So it's a Saturday. The Eventbrite will probably be posted on Facebook Monday or Tuesday. We just had to move the time slightly just because of an instructor conflict. But yeah, it's going to be 12 to 2, April 26th.
And when you kind of forward people to your group, do you suggest the website, or do you suggest your Facebook page, or where can we direct people?
So if you're looking for Barrie specific chapter stuff, like then it'd be Facebook. If you're looking for all of our workshops, definitely the website. Like right now, for instance, I think we have 40 that are available right now.
Oh my goodness.
Oh, we've got 20. These are all the closest ones to me. So we've got this is a kids. It's using Scratch. We've got web making with HTML and CSS, advanced web making. This is a teacher's learning code. So heads up with microbits. We got a lot of web making, and then we've got managing data with SQL.
Oh wow!
And we've got JavaScript, and this is also teachers where we're playing around with VR.
That's oh man.
Yeah, so we do lots of different types of workshops, and we cover a lot of different subjects. But yeah, the website is definitely great just because it does list everything, just because we're a fairly small chapter, so we only run one a month. Other chapters are larger, so they might run more than one.
Oh, wow.
Or and because there are so many different chapters, you can have multiple workshops in a month, and they can be in all sorts of different topics. So for instance, like if the April 26th SQL workshop doesn't work for you at Barrie, there will probably be another one for a different chapter at a different time that might work better.
Oh, wow. Okay. Well,
but all of our workshops are posted on the experiences page of Canada Learning Code. I do post the Barrie ones on our Facebook page, but they're always found here, and you can also find them on Eventbrite.
That's awesome. We always think about chapters, and it's been a weird last year and this year where it's like, oh, I don't have to drive to that chapter. Like they're probably doing it online. It's probably available, and why not take advantage of it? Because who knows? Maybe they'll get rid of the online workshops and just go to in person.
Yeah. So for right now, as far as Canada Learning Code knows, all of our workshops are going to be online until the new year for sure. Like, unless something drastically changes, currently our plan is to be online until January of next year for, like, that's as far as we've planned so far, but it's definitely going to be online until then.
And it could be a combination, or it could be.
Yeah, like we don't know what the future holds or anything, but yeah, all I'm saying is online until January. That's what I'm confident with.
Safe bet. Does anyone else have any questions?
No, just thank you very much. It was like so clear for me, and I'm really, really excited for the SQL one. Like I honestly hated that class, but I'm kind of excited to do it with you. Like really.
Well, I'm glad to hear. This is actually the first time I've taught. Like I've done the mentoring, I've done the producing, but I just haven't quite had the confidence yet to do a teaching experience. But I thought, it's a small group, and I actually know both of these languages really well, and I feel like I can do this.
You fooled us. I thought you were a pro at this, because that was well done. Really appreciate you not only taking the time, but doing such an excellent job and asking our questions real time. That's not everyone can do that, so that's awesome.
Thank you. Well, I'm glad you guys really enjoyed it, and so message us on Facebook if you guys ever have any questions.
Okay.
And if you need so are there any mentoring opportunities for SQL?
For sure, absolutely. Yeah, if you we have mentors at all of our workshops. So once the
workshops in the chat, I'll send it to you.
Yeah. The link hasn't been created yet, just because it's getting created on Monday or Tuesday. But once the workshop's posted, we have tickets on Eventbrite, so you can sign up as a learner or as a mentor. And if you're signed up as a mentor, you'll get access to all of our workshop slides and stuff. And before the workshop, we meet specifically for mentors, like a half hour before the learners come, and we kind of just talk about the workshop, how it's going to go, address any quick questions, and then welcome the learners. And then you're kind of like a resource for the learners, so that they can ask questions, and you can also give them tips and tricks.
The one event I went to, I was surprised how many mentors. There was a ton, and it was amazing. I'd have 3 mentors working with me on a problem, or just trying to tweak an odd error, and it was more faster, and you could hear different perspectives, and it was a good ratio, I thought.
We try to do 1 mentor to every 4 learners. Sometimes we'll get more mentor, like a higher mentor to learner ratio depending on the week, but it's always like 1 mentor to 4 learners. That's what we go for. And for the online programs, we're kind of still experimenting with like breakout rooms where you're just with a mentor for a bit, or if it's just like 1 session. It really depends on the size and the material and everything like that. But we always have mentors at our workshops.
Yeah, you beat me to my question. I was just wondering how that happens online. But
we're definitely still figuring it out. Sometimes we'll do breakout rooms, sometimes we don't. It depends on the instructors' preferences, the material, like how it's kind of transitioned from being, because all of our workshops were in person originally, so we've transitioned them all online. So there were some changes that had to be made just to make sure that the material was still understandable in the time frame that we now have. Because for the adult ones, we were typically from we were almost 8 hours, so like it was like a full day of learning and stuff. So we had to reduce. We had to cut down the size just because you can't do 8 hours online, especially with like people working from home and taking school online. It just
yeah. Oh wow. Yeah. Still, that's an impressive amount of workshop to put together.
Yeah, no, I really like our content for the workshops. It's definitely a lot of fun, and yeah, we'd love to have everybody. But I will definitely be posting the information for the workshop in April, probably Monday or Tuesday once we got all of our links created.
And sorry, hang on a second. One thing here.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to reach out to you afterwards, Leah, but I'm doing this thing now as part of the study group for freeCodeCamp at Barrie. I'm going to be sending you some playing cards from freeCodeCamp. And each playing card's got a programmer throughout history. So it's a fun little deck of cards.
That's really cool.
Yeah, just as a thank you for doing this, because we really appreciate you taking the time and being our guest speaker. So that'll be our little thank you. I'll reach out for information afterwards to get that to you. If nobody has any questions, I'm going to ask we let Leah go. If Emily's all right with that too. She's the host, so she gets to pull the plug when she wants.
So thank you a lot, Leah. And as I said, I am very excited for our next meeting. And if no one has anything to add, I guess I'll see all of you on our next event.
Okay, sounds good. Well, I hope everyone had a great night, and yes, join us on our Facebook page and join us at an event and attend a workshop. It doesn't have to be Barrie's. We've got tons. Edmonton's doing some pretty cool stuff. Like, we've all got some really cool stuff going on.
You received a thank you from Brittany.
Oh, thank you. Well, I will stop sharing my screen. I hope everyone has a great rest of their evening, and
Enjoy your weekend, guys. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. That was really nice.
Thank you very much.
You.
Have a good night, everybody.
Bye.
See you next time.
Good night. Bye-bye.